I really wanted to speak about a topic that always interested me, and I never really got to do that much research about it, but it was always like a big mystery to me. And that topic is the Yeshiva of Shem and Eber, which, even though it's not really mentioned explicitly in the Chumash, but it comes up a lot. There are a bunch of instances that this concept of a Yeshiva of Shem and Eber comes up. So just a little background. Shem was one of the three sons of Noach. He was the most righteous of all three and the greatest person out of all three. And he ended up being one of the forebearers of Avram Avinu, of Avram. And he really was one of the first sort of righteous people in the world. And one of his sort of grandsons, if I'm not mistaken, a great or great-great-grandson, was Eber. So both of them lived through very tumultuous times, not just the flood, but also the generation of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babylon. So they both lived through very tumultuous times, and it comes up numerous times in Chumash, and the sages point out, even in the storyline of the Chumash, that our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, seem to have all spent time in this very mysterious yeshiva being run by Shem and Eber. So maybe I'm going to start this year. We'll bring a few of the sources, some very interesting ones, really. We'll talk out maybe a couple of the questions that come up. What were they learning in this yeshiva? And then we'll maybe hopefully bring out some practical lessons for ourselves from what we can take out, perhaps from some of the concepts that were taught in this yeshiva. So, yeshiva is a very special place. I had the merit to be in yeshiva and learn Torah, both in Israel and Jerusalem, as well as in Woodmere and the Five Towns in New York. And a yeshiva is really a place that shapes the whole person. When a person who immerses himself in a yeshiva, he's immersed in Torah, and our tradition is that the Torah can actually change a person. In Yiddish, we say, Torah macht Eber le Mensch. That Torah can actually change a person at his very essence. So the Torah that our Avos learned, it's important to know what shaped them. And in fact, our Avos, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, were all very shaped by the Torah of Shem and Eber. So if we learn about what they were learning, perhaps we can also get a little bit of that same Torah. So the first source I'm going to quote is from Parshas Vayetze. So we all know what happened after Yaakov Avinu deceived Yitzchak and received the brachos. Esav was ready to murder him. So Rivka came up with the idea that to send Yaakov away in order that he can go get married, really outside of the land of Israel. Now, the pasuk says, the verse in the beginning of Parshas Vayetze says, "Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva." He left Beersheva. Now, if you notice, it's a very funny thing, because at the end of Parshas Toldos, the previous parsha, it left off saying that Yaakov Avinu had already listened to his parents regarding this point. So why does it say that he left? So Chazal, the sages, they expound on this pasuk, and they say that when Yaakov left, it's actually teaching us something. That he didn't really leave immediately. First, he left to attend the yeshiva of Eber. So it says, Umat Talmud Lomar Kan Vayetze. What does it mean when the verse over here it says Vayetze Yaakov? Rather, Amar V'chizkiya, Asa Yaakov matmoim be'eretz. He was matmin himself. He hid himself in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. He didn't actually leave the land of Israel immediately. He hid himself there. Where? He hid himself Itzel Zikeno Eber, he hid himself by his grandfather, Eber. And it goes on, it says, Ukisha birer kol Talmudo. And once Yaakov Avinu got clarity in his learning, Acher kach yetze, that's when he left. So he didn't actually have an immediate leaving. He didn't leave the land of Israel immediately. He actually spent some extra time there by the Yeshiva of Eber. And it says only after Yaakov Avinu got clarity in his Torah learning, at that point he left the land of Israel. So this might be a little more famous. So it says that Yaakov Avinu, he sort of was, Lashon Pasuk is, Vayifga b'makom. He sort of happened upon a place. He was Yifga b'makom. He happened upon a certain place, and he laid down there. And it says that he took some stones and put them around him, around his head, and he took a shluff, he took a nap. So it could be everyone knows this. So it says that when he laid down here, which we know actually ended up being the place of the future Beis HaMikdash, Har HaMoriah, the mountain of Moriah, where Avram Avinu also almost ended up sacrificing his son Isaac. In that place, that was where Yaakov took a nap, slept. So the sages, they darshan from this, and they say, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Kan Shachov, this is where he slept. Kol Yodalad Shana Shahaya Mutman Ba'aretz Bebeis Eber, the whole 14 years that he was hiding in the land of Israel at the house of his grandfather Eber, Umishamish Eber, and he was learning from him deep Talmudic analysis. During all of that time, Lo Shachav, he didn't lay down even once. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda learns out from this verse regarding Yaakov Avinu going to sleep on the mountain on Har Moriah. To say that we see from here, only here, Yaakov Avinu went to sleep. But before that, he didn't go to sleep. In fact, he was up for 14 years straight. So as a sort of a side point, one of the things, it's actually, I think, might be a famous Musar lecture from Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, one of the great Rosh Yeshivas in Jerusalem. He says he learns from this story a very important fundamental concept about a human being. It would seem impossible for a person to stay up for even more than a few days, and yet we see Yaakov Avinu did it for 14 years. And it doesn't seem to be that the Torah relates this in any way that it was a nace, some sort of miracle. It seems like this was actually coming from his own power, his own strength, that he was able to stay up for 14 years straight, just learning Torah. So Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz, he takes a lesson from this story, and he says that if you believe that you can do something, and you're committed to it completely, even if it seems beyond the realm of normal human experience, you can. So that's what Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz takes from this story of Yaakov Avinu. In any case, we see that along the way in Yaakov Avinu's journey to end up marrying Rachel and Leah, he takes a 14-year break to go and learn Torah from his grandfather, Eber. Get a few more sources, perhaps. Really, the first source that we actually see mention of this concept of the Yeshiva Shem Eber actually happens much earlier in Parshas Toldos, interestingly enough. So it says that when Rebecca became pregnant, she felt like this incredible sensation going on in her womb. Like it was like the baby inside of her was jumping around and going crazy. And almost it seemed like it had dual personality, because this baby would try to jump out when they came near a synagogue, and also try to jump out when it came to a house of idol worship. So Rebecca was very confused. What's going on? So the Torah says, "V'telech lidros es Hashem." She went to go inquire of Hashem. She wanted to know what's going on inside of me. And it says that her pain actually was so intense. She really couldn't handle the excruciating agony of the pregnancy that she was going through. So she wanted to go ask of Hashem, when the pregnancy would end, and how she can alleviate the suffering that she was going through being pregnant with such a child. So we know, obviously, she wasn't pregnant with just one child. She was pregnant with twins, and it was Yaakov and Esav. So it says that she went to go inquire. So to whom did she go to inquire? So nowadays we may not be able to go directly and ask a prophet, but back then they had this concept that you can really go and ask someone who can, in a way, speak directly to Hashem and really get an answer to your questions. So who did she go to? Interestingly enough, it doesn't say that she went to Abraham. It doesn't say she went to her husband Yitzchak. It doesn't say that. Where did she go? So it says when Rivka went to go and ask this question, it says, were there houses of divine worship and houses of Torah study in those days? Obviously, Chazal understand that she went to a Talmud Chacham, to a Torah scholar, to a prophet. So the Medrash, it wonders, who did she go to? Were there houses of divine worship and houses of Torah study in those days? Rather, where did she go? She went specifically to the study hall of Shem and Eber. So this teaches you that anyone who greets a righteous elder, a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar, it's as if he greets the divine presence. That's why it refers that she went to go inquire of God what was going on. So that's what this teaches us. So we see another example, really almost the first example I've seen from a medrash that says that one of our avos, really one of our imahos, went to go spend time in this yeshiva, and here all she went to do was go to ask a question, what's going on inside of me? And obviously she got an answer to that issue and was told that really there's two nations in your womb. There's Esav and there's Yaakov. One is going to be drawn towards Torah study, and one is going to be drawn towards idol worship. So on that theme, so the verse in the Torah, it says, when Yaakov was born and he started growing up, it says, "V'Yaakov ish tam yoshev ohalim." I don't know if there were ever two twins that were more different in the entire history of the world than Yaakov and Esav. They were incredibly different. And the way the Torah points out the special quality of Jacob is it says that he was tam, he was wholesome, and he was a yoshev ohalim. He sat in the tents. So what does that mean that he sat in the tents? It means that he was studying Torah. Esau, on the other hand, was a man of the field. He would go hunting. It says he murdered many people. He tried to convince many people to do idol worship. So two very, very different polar opposite brothers. I actually have a friend, he's also, just on the topic of twins, there's a quick story. I have a friend who's very much a math guy. He's very, in the box, tries to do things in the box. And his brother happens to be a very, very great artist. He's excels in the field of creativity and art. And they couldn't be more different from each other. So we see oftentimes that what happens is twins come out and they're polar opposites. I don't know if I have a brother and sister that happen to be twins. They're twins. They're my younger brother and sister. I don't think they're polar opposite. They are different. They have different interests and things like that, like most boys and girls do. But in the case of Jacob and Esav, they were really polar opposite from a moral perspective. So on this topic, what does it mean that Jacob was a Yoshev Ohalim, that he sat in the tents? So the sages tell us there were two tents back then. There was the house of study of Shem, the base of measures of Shem, and the house of study of Eber, the house of study of Eber. So we actually see that it wasn't, sometimes it's referred to as the base measures of Shem, the Eber, and sometimes it's the base measure of Shem and the base measures of Eber. So in this context, it actually refers to them as separate places. In any case, Yaakov Avinu learnt a lot of Torah from these two houses of study, that they were a very big influence on Jacob. So far we've seen a few instances. We saw Rivka go to inquire of Shem ve'Ever when she was pregnant with Jacob and Esav. We've seen Yaakov, as he was growing up, as a young man, spent some of his formative years in these yeshivas of Shem and Eber. And lastly, when Yaakov Avinu was even older, and he was on the run from Esav, his brother who sought to kill him, he also spent a good amount of time, 14 years straight, no sleep, in the yeshiva of Shem and Eber. So a few more very, very interesting sources. So there's a medrash, I saw it online on my computer. It's the Medrash Yilmadenu. That's what the medrash is called. I never saw it before. But the medrash says there were 4 special Hasidim that lived. This is sort of around the time of the Dor Haflaga, the generation of the Tower of Babylon. And it says there were 4 Hasidim. There was Shem, Eber, Noach, and Avraham. Yeah, Shem, Eber, Noach, and Avraham. Those are the 4 Hasidim. So it says, obviously during that time period in history, there was really a lot of idol worship going on, and humanity really descended very, very far in their moral level. People were committing all sorts of atrocities in terms of theft and murder and adultery, all the worst things that a human being could descend to. So if you're a righteous person living during those time periods, what are you supposed to do? So there's actually a famous Rambam. I remember learning this Rambam when Maimonides, when I first went to Yeshiva. And Maimonides says an interesting thing, that if you're in a place where everyone has sort of descended into moral corruption, the only option is for you to leave that place. That's your only option. You have to leave the place that has descended into moral corruption. So where do you go? So you go to another place? But he says, okay, well, what if every civilized place has descended into this state of moral corruption? Then what is a person supposed to do? So Maimonides says that a person is actually supposed to then live in the desert, away from human civilization. That's the only option. So it actually says during this period of the Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babylon, and afterwards, that it says Avraham, Shem, and Eber, they all hid themselves. They hid themselves in order to not be influenced by the moral decay of their generation. It says only Noach actually tried to give the generation guidance and teichacha, to sort of reprimand that generation. It fell into such a low level. Obviously, Noach wasn't listened to. But it says that Shem and Eber and Avraham, they all hid themselves. it also says very interesting. There's another almost parallel statement the sages make. It's not exactly the same. I saw it in the Medrash on Tehillim. And it actually lists 5 righteous people. Like we said, Avram, Noach, Shem, Eber. And it also lists Ashur, one of the sons of Shem. So Ashur, which actually it's a very nice coincidence that we're talking about Ashur, because Ashur is in the news a lot right now. Ashur is the predecessor for the country of Syria. Ashur is Syria in Hebrew. So as we know, Syria is very much in the news as of now, because they just overthrew the government of Syria. So everything in a lot of times with what you're learning in Torah has a parallel to what's going on in current events or in your life. So we're going to learn a little bit about Ashur right now, just because it's interesting and is connected a little bit to current events. So it says those are the 5 righteous people that lived around the time of the Tower of Babylon. So it says, sort of a separate discussion here. It says about Noah, that he didn't serve Hashem because he grew a vineyard and got drunk and ended up not serving Hashem. It says about Shem and Eber, are the topic of our discussion tonight again, that they hid themselves. It says about Ashur, again, the father of Syria. His name actually means Syria. About Ashur, it says that he separated himself from his generation. He separated himself from his generation. He didn't want to live with the people who were building the Tower of Babylon. So it says that he actually went away, and it says that he founded a city called Nineveh. So I hope everyone knows where Nineveh comes up. It comes up in the story of Jonah, in Sefer Yonah. And it says that it's actually because in the schus, in the merit of Ashur, that was why many generations later, Hashem didn't destroy Nineveh, even though they had descended also into a state of moral decay. But since it was originally founded by a righteous person, Ashur, that was why Hashem didn't end up destroying it. So a very interesting sort of side note that I wanted to bring out because it has to do with current events. So I'll leave it there for now, though. In any case, it's another example of Shem and Eber being discussed in the context of Abraham and Noah as being very righteous people in their generation, and that they had to sort of hide themselves to keep themselves separate from their generation. So another couple examples that I'll say. Benjamin, the son of Yaakov, was the youngest son of Yaakov. It says he had a son who had a very interesting name. His name was Mupim, with an M sound, Mupim. That was his name. So the sages ask, what was his name? What did his name mean, Mupim? That's a very strange sounding name. So the sages, they explain that his name actually it's a contraction of 2 Hebrew words from the mouth, mipi. Mupim comes from the word mipi, from his mouth. And it comes to teach that Jacob actually gave over all of the Torah that he learned from Shem and Eber. He gave it to his grandson, Mupim, who is the son of Binyam. So again, we see that it's a very much part of the Avos. Their tradition came very much through Shem. Another interesting point also that comes up in Chumash is when Avram Avinu had just defeated the 4 kings and was able to save his nephew Lot, it says that he ended up going to Jerusalem and he met a certain person named Malchi Tzedek. And Malchi Tzedek comes out to greet him and gives him a blessing. Now the sages teach us that Malchi Tzedek was actually none other than Shem. Shem, the son of Noah. And it says that Shem was actually very nervous, since one of the 4 kings, Kollel Eber, was one of the names of the 4 kings, since he had tried to kill Avram Avinu, and he was actually one of Shem's descendants. He was Shem's son, I believe. So Shem was actually nervous to meet Abraham. But there's a medrash that says that one of the things Shem did was he actually had prepared Torah to teach, to sort of give over a nice shtickle Torah, a piece of Torah, to tell over to Abraham. So again, another example that Shem was very much within the tradition of Torah learning and even had what to teach Abraham. I'll say over one other very interesting thing that I saw. It's actually in the Zohar Chadash, which is one of the parts of the Zohar. I found this when I was doing a little search. And it says a very interesting thing. So we know that Yaakov Avinu was very, very beautiful. He was a very good-looking person. And Chazal say that he had the same good looks, the same beauty as Adam Harishon, as Adam, the first man. So the Zohar Chadash, it says that he had the same beauty as Adam Harishon. And it says the reason why, begin the Yaakov Yoshev Ohalim. The reason why that he had such a beauty to him was because he sat in the tents and learned Torah. Va'oliv Taman bebeis Shem ve'Ever. And he learned in the study halls of Shem and Eber and Avram and Yitzchak. What was he learning? Lemiflach l'kudsha breichu. He was learning about how to serve Hashem. He was learning about divine service. Why? Why did he have this ability to do this? Begin di'ihu b'chor. The reason why was because he was the firstborn. As it says, B'ni b'chor Yisrael. Hashem says about the Jewish people, and specifically about Yaakov, about Jacob, it says that it refers to him as my son, my firstborn, Israel. So we see that part of Jacob's growth into becoming a very wholesome, perfect person came about from his time in the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever, and it lists it along with he learned from the base medrash of Shem, the base medrash of Eber, the base medrash of Avraham and Yitzchak, and this is where he learned how to serve Hashem. It also says interesting. After this, I just want to quote it because it's very interesting. It says that Yaakov actually had some very special books, very special old books in his possession. And it mentions a few of these very special books. It mentions the book of Adam. Apparently Adam Harishon, Adam, the first person, authored a book. And Chanoch, who we had spoken about a few weeks ago, also authored a book, and Yaakov had that book. And the Sefer Yetzirah, which is a very esoteric book about Kabbalah, that Avram Avinu had written, that Yaakov also had that book. So all of these very special books, Yaakov Avinu had. And it says that the tractate dealing with the laws of idolatry, Maseches Avodah Zarah, back in the times of Avram Avinu, had 100 chapters. Now it has a fraction of that, much, much less than 100 chapters. But back in the day, it had to have 100 chapters because of what people needed to learn to protect themselves from the influence of idolatry. Okay, so those are a few of the sources that I wanted to discuss regarding Shem and Eber. Now, perhaps we can ask a few of the very obvious questions that come up when discussing this topic. The most obvious question is, of course, what did they learn in this yeshiva? The Torah wasn't given yet, so what exactly were they studying? Next question is, if Yaakov Avinu, Jacob had the opportunity to learn from his grandfather, Abraham, which he surely did, and also from his father, Isaac, Yitzchak, surely, as much as they were much greater tzaddikim, saints, than were Shem and Eber, why didn't he just stay with his father and his grandfather to learn Torah from them? Yet it says, even before he had to run away from home, fleeing Esav, already from before, as a younger child, as a young man, he had already been learning in the yeshiva Shem ve'Eber. What was so special about the Torah that he was learning there that it actually trumped his learning from his father and grandfather, the two of the greatest people to ever live? Moreover, I think another question that I'm very curious is, why don't we have this tradition anymore nowadays? Whatever they were teaching in the yeshiva of Shem and Eber seems to not be part of the yeshiva curriculum we have anymore, at least not explicitly. So what were they doing? What exactly were they doing? So some of the explanations I've heard, not sure how satisfied I am by these explanations, but I'll tell you what it seems to be is the common understanding is that most of the learning that they were doing was specifically learning about the laws of idolatry, the laws of Avodah Zarah. And as much as the time period they lived in was fraught with people doing idolatry, and the desire to do idolatry was so much stronger then than it is now, so they had to devote themselves much more to learning what constitutes idolatry, what exactly defines it, and the different practices that existed, because it would have been very, very easy for a person to fall into the trap of doing idolatry without even realizing it. That's one explanation that I've heard. Another explanation I've heard specifically is that what they learned in Yeshiva Shem ve'Eber, and this would explain why Yaakov Avinu had to learn at this particular yeshiva prior to leaving Israel to go to Lavan's house and marry Rachel, was that they taught specifically how to survive in Gullus, in exile. When a person's not living in Israel, which is the most spiritual of all countries, a person needs to learn how to survive spiritually in what could be described as a spiritual wasteland. That's another explanation that I heard. Another idea that I thought perhaps, I've seen some people maybe say this idea, is Shem and Eber were unique. They both lived through very, very trying times. Shem had lived before the Mabul, before the flood of Noah, and Eber had lived during the Tower of Babel. Like I said, when humanity fell into the state of moral decay and corruption. So it's possible to suggest that they were sharing their experiences, the Torah that they learned, and how they struggled to survive spiritually in times that were so out of the ordinary and beyond trying what we can imagine. So these are some of the three ideas that I had of what I've heard from other people and what sort of I thought maybe was what was going on. Maybe just to expand on it a little bit, what sort of Torah they were teaching in the yeshiva of Shem and Eber is that there's really two time periods in the history of the Jewish people. There was really the time before the Torah and the time after the Torah. Before the Torah, the way a person would act is based on what he would see as being the main thing that can bring a repair to the world. For instance, we know that the Torah forbids a person marrying two sisters. That's something the Torah doesn't allow. And yet, Yaakov Avinu married two sisters. He married Rachel and Leah. So this is something that the Torah doesn't permit, and yet Yaakov Avinu, since he was a very, very wise person, understood that nevertheless, that was what God wanted him to do. So again, there's two periods. There's a time before the giving of the Torah when the Torah became binding. There's a time before that, before the Torah became binding, and the time after the Torah was given when the Torah became a binding contract between us and God. So before the Torah was given, like this example that I just said of Jacob marrying two sisters, it was possible to do things outside of the realm of Torah, and for that to actually be something that would bring about repair, tikkun, to the world, which is something that cannot happen nowadays. Now, of course, there's a very big danger that could come about, is that a person doesn't know perhaps where to draw the line. Obviously, Yaakov Avinu had incredible spiritual perception, but without the proper training and guidance from people who also learned how to be spiritual, learned how to live a life devoted to avodas Hashem before the giving of Torah, Yaakov Avinu needed to get guidance exactly how he should live before the giving of the Torah, when you could even do things that were not necessarily permitted by the Torah. Now, the system, I just want to speak out the system perhaps of world history for 1 second, and then we can get back into it, is that the first 2,000 years, and this would sort of include up to Abraham, were called the years of Tohu, the years of chaos. That's why the descent of humanity from Adam until Noah, and then from Noah till Abraham, the world just kept descending and descending and descending. There was the Mabul, when the earth descended into decay, where there was the Tower of Babylon, also where the world tried to wage war against God. Can't even imagine such things. And of course, there was Sodom, a city where the moral depravity was, perhaps the most in world history. So all of these events happened during the first part of world history, during the years known as Tohu. The next 2,000 years were called the years of Torah. Now, it doesn't mean the Torah was actually given at that time period, but it was building up to be given, because that was when Abraham was born, and Abraham founded the Jewish people. Abraham started the Jewish people. Before Abraham came around, there were individuals, for example, Chanoch and Mesushalach and Noach, and also Shem and Eber, who perhaps were individuals that educated other individuals about God, about serving God, about repairing the world. Those were things that these individuals did. Now, a tremendous shift happened when Abraham came. The shift that happened was that Abraham was the founder of the Jewish people. He was the first Jew. Now, that would mean that it's not just individuals anymore serving God. Now there's going to be an entire nation serving God and going on the proper moral path. Now, Yaakov, when he went to Lavan, he had already perhaps perfected in a way, he was really in the process, I should say, of building the Jewish people, of taking Abraham's legacy, of trying to begin a people. And his mission in going to Lavan's house was to give birth to the 12 tribes. But his own spiritual challenges when dealing with someone like Lavan, and also having to marry two sisters and all of these things, made it that the Torah that he needed to learn was the Torah from Shem and Eber. Before he went down to have that challenge of being with Lavan, that was the Torah that he needed to learn and internalize, since in a way he would be like an individual. He wouldn't have the backing of an entire nation yet. That was something that he was working towards, and with the birth of his 12 sons, that was what he would have. So now, maybe just to back it up, perhaps I explained a little bit about the topic of Shem ve'Ever. There's much more to discuss, and hopefully I can get a chance to talk, whoever wants to, more about these ideas. But maybe just to wrap up and to bring it back to ourselves, what can we learn from this? So first is, one of the main lessons of Shem and Eber is that we're talking about two people that went through very difficult challenges in history. They were present for world events, earth-shattering world events, the flood, the Tower of Babylon. Now, we in our own lives, we may meet people also that have gone through very harrowing experiences and experienced earth-shattering events in world history. Perhaps, we're sort of at the tail end. We're at the tail end of this generation, but there are still a few people left who went through the Holocaust and experienced the horrors of that time period. And the amount we can learn from people like that is also astounding. Additionally, people perhaps who served in the IDF in a lot of the wars throughout Israel's history also have gone through tremendous experiences and also have lessons to teach us. So each person in his way can learn, meaning Kollel says the wise person is a person who can learn from anybody. So Yeshiva Shem ve'Ever specifically the lesson to us is to learn, to try to find the people who've had those experiences that we may not have had and can give that over to us, the lessons that they learned. Another thing, one of the lessons of the Yeshiva Shem ve'Ever, and as much as it's the type of Torah that Yaakov Avinu needed when he was going into exile, it's the type of Torah we also need perhaps when we go through spiritual lows. We all go through things in our Judaism, in our Yiddishkeit, where we feel distant from mitzvahs and from Torah, and perhaps we feel distant from tefillah, from prayer. We don't feel like we can connect to the words. We don't feel like we connect to God. So the lesson, the antidote to that issue is to realize that whatever I'm experiencing, that's also from Hashem. The challenge that I have in spirituality, that's also from Hashem. And when a person learns to find Hashem, even in their challenges, then they can weather any storm, they can go through any experience, wherever it is, and they can deal with it. So perhaps these are some of the lessons that we can learn from the yeshiva of Shem ve'Ever. We also had some nice current events discussed, and a lot of very interesting allusions to this very mysterious yeshiva in the tradition of our sages. And there really is a lot more to discuss. So anyone who wants to hear more about it, I sort of had to cram a lot in at the end. So anyone who wants to hear more about it, please, let's talk. And I wish everyone a good night. And thank you for listening. Take care.